The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle as Sergeant Major Thomas Bradley adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. After 25 years in the Royal Guard, he had seen countless tourists, dignitaries, and curious onlookers pass through these historic gates. But today felt different somehow, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Standing beside him was Wellington, a magnificent Blackshire horse whose gentle eyes and calm demeanor had made him a favorite among both guards and visitors. Wellington had served as a ceremonial guard horse for 8 years, and his intelligence seemed to grow with each passing season. The massive horse stood perfectly still, his polished tack gleaming in the sunlight. But Thomas noticed something unusual in Wellington's behavior that morning. The horse kept turning his head toward the main entrance, ears perked forward as if waiting for something special. Wellington's nostrils flared slightly, testing the air with an almost human-like curiosity. Thomas had learned to read his partner's moods over their 3 years together, and today Wellington seemed more alert than usual. "What is it, old boy?" Thomas whispered, running his gloved hand along Wellington's powerful neck. The horse nickered softly, a sound that always reminded Thomas of quiet conversation between old friends. As the castle gates opened for the day's first tour group, Thomas spotted what had captured Wellington's attention. A small yellow bus was pulling up to the visitors' entrance, different from the usual tourist coaches. The words, "Sunshine Special Needs School," were painted in cheerful blue letters along the side, decorated with handprints in rainbow colors. Mrs. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the bus first, her kind face showing both excitement and nervous anticipation. As the head teacher at Sunshine School, she had organized this trip for months, knowing how much her students loved animals and history. Behind her, 12 children aged between 8 and 16 began filing off the bus, each accompanied by a support worker or volunteer. Among them was Emma, a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome whose face lit up with pure joy at the sight of the castle. She had been talking about this trip for weeks, practicing how to say hello to the guard horses in her speech therapy sessions. Next to her, Marcus, a 14-year-old boy with autism, kept his eyes fixed on the ground but clutched a small notebook filled with horse facts he had been memorizing. Lily, a quiet 12-year-old who used a wheelchair due to cerebral palsy, had her communication device ready with pre-programmed phrases about horses. Her support worker, Janet, pushed her chair carefully over the uneven cobblestones while Lily's eyes searched eagerly for the famous guard horses she had seen in pictures as the group approached the ceremonial area where Thomas and Wellington stood at attention. Something remarkable began to happen. Wellington's ears swiveled toward the children, and his usual statue-like posture seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. The great horse's breathing slowed and his stance widened slightly, becoming more stable and welcoming. Thomas felt the change through the reins and was amazed. In all his years of service, he had never seen Wellington react this way to visitors. The horse seemed to sense something special about these children, something that called to his gentle nature in a way that regular tourists never had. Emma was the first to notice Wellington. Her eyes grew wide with wonder, and she tugged on Mrs. Mitchell's sleeve. Look, the big horse is looking at me," she whispered in her characteristic soft voice, pointing with trembling excitement. Mrs. Mitchell had briefed the children about maintaining a respectful distance from the guard horses, explaining that they were working animals who needed to stay focused on their duties. But as she watched Wellington's reaction, she began to wonder if perhaps this visit might be different from what she had expected. Marcus finally looked up from his notebook, and when his eyes met Wellington's gentle gaze, something shifted in the boy's usually tense posture. For Marcus, who often found eye contact overwhelming and social situations challenging, the horse's calm presence felt surprisingly comforting. He took a small step closer to his support worker, David, but kept his gaze fixed on the magnificent animal. Meanwhile, other ceremonial horses in the courtyard began showing similar behavior. Chester, a beautiful bay gelding, turned his head toward the group with obvious interest. His guard, Corporal James Wright, noticed his partner's unusual attention to the visitors and found himself curious about what was creating this reaction. The children's excitement was palpable but respectful. They whispered among themselves, pointing and sharing observations about the horse's tack, their size, and their beauty. Their joy was infectious, and even some of the usually stern-faced guards found themselves fighting back smiles. Lily had positioned her wheelchair where she could get the best view of Wellington, and she began typing on her communication device. The electronic voice spoke her words clearly. "The horse is very beautiful. Can horses understand when people are happy?" Her question hung in the air, and Thomas found himself thinking about it seriously. After years of working with these incredible animals, he had come to believe they understood far more than most people realized. Wellington's behavior today seemed to prove that theory. As the official tour began, the guide started explaining the history of the Royal Guard horses and their important role in British ceremonies. But Thomas noticed that Wellington continued to focus his attention on the children, particularly Emma, who had moved as close to the rope barrier as the rules allowed. The morning was turning into something none of them had expected. What had started as a routine day of ceremonial duties was transforming into something that would touch hearts and create memories that would last far beyond this single visit. Wellington seemed to understand that these children needed something special, something beyond the usual tourist experience. And as Thomas watched his partner's extraordinary behavior, he began to realize that perhaps the horses had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment, to show the world just how much love and understanding they were capable of sharing. As the morning progressed, Wellington's behavior became increasingly remarkable. The massive horse, who was trained to remain perfectly still for hours during ceremonial duties, began making subtle movements that seemed designed to better connect with the children from Sunshine School. When Emma pressed closer to the rope barrier, Wellington carefully shifted his weight and lowered his great head just slightly, bringing his kind eyes closer to her level. The movement was so gentle and deliberate that Thomas barely felt it through the reins, but the effect on Emma was immediate and profound. "He's saying hello to me," Emma gasped, her face breaking into the brightest smile Thomas had ever seen. Her support worker, Mrs. Patterson, watched in amazement as the usually shy girl began talking directly to Wellington in her soft, careful voice. "Hello, beautiful horse. My name is Emma. I learned about you in school. You're very important and very brave." Emma's words came slowly but with such genuine warmth that even Thomas felt moved by her sincerity. Wellington's response was extraordinary. The horse blinked slowly, a behavior that equine experts recognize as a sign of trust and relaxation. Then, in a move that made Thomas's heart skip, Wellington extended his muzzle toward Emma, stopping just short of the rope barrier as if he understood exactly where the boundary was. Marcus, who had been watching this interaction with growing fascination, suddenly spoke up for the first time that day. "The horse likes her," he said quietly to his support worker, David. "Horses have good memories and can recognize emotions. This one knows Emma is special." David was surprised to hear Marcus speak without being prompted, something that rarely happened in new environments. The boy's usually rigid posture had relaxed, and his hands had stopped their nervous fidgeting. Something about Wellington's calm presence was helping Marcus feel more comfortable than anyone had expected. Lily had been typing furiously on her communication device, trying to capture all her thoughts about what she was witnessing. Her electronic voice spoke her words. "The horse has kind eyes. Can I tell him thank you for being so nice to my friends?" Mrs. Mitchell approached Thomas carefully, not wanting to disturb the magical moment but hoping to understand what was happening. "Sergeant Major," she said quietly, "I've never seen my students react to animals quite like this." "Your horse seems to understand them in a special way." Thomas nodded, still watching Wellington's gentle interaction with the children. "Ma'am, I've been working with horses for over 2 decades, and Wellington here has always been special. But I've never seen him respond to visitors like this. It's as if he knows these children need something extra from him today." The tour guide had paused the official presentation, recognizing that something remarkable was occurring. Other tourists had begun to notice the interaction as well, and many were taking photos and videos, though they respectfully maintained their distance to allow the children their special moment. Chester, the bay horse standing nearby with Corporal Wright, had also begun showing unusual behavior. A young boy named Sam, who had been hanging back from the group due to his anxiety around crowds, had caught Chester's attention. Sam had been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and large groups often overwhelmed him. But Chester seemed to sense Sam's discomfort. The horse turned his body slightly, creating a visual barrier between Sam and the rest of the crowd. This small movement gave Sam a sense of privacy and protection that helped him feel more secure. David, Marcus's support worker, noticed this interaction and quietly guided Sam toward Chester's position. "Look, Sam," he whispered. "This horse is making a quiet space just for you." Sam looked up at Chester and felt an immediate connection. The horse's steady breathing and calm presence helped regulate Sam's own anxiety. For the first time since arriving at the castle, Sam's shoulders relaxed and he took a deep breath. Meanwhile, Lily had managed to move her wheelchair to a position where she could see both Wellington and Chester. Despite her physical challenges, Lily had always been the most observant child in her class, and she was fascinated by how the horses seemed to understand exactly what each child needed. Her communication device spoke her thoughts. The horses are being doctors for feelings. They know how to help people feel better without using medicine or words, and this observation struck everyone who heard it. Mrs. Mitchell felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched her students experiencing something she had never been able to provide in a classroom setting. As the morning continued, more children from the group began to approach the horses. Each interaction was different but equally special. A girl named Rachel, who struggled with severe shyness, found herself giggling as Wellington's ears twitched in response to her whispered comments about his beautiful mane. Another boy, Jamie, who used sign language to communicate, began signing to Chester. While the horse couldn't understand sign language, Chester watched Jamie's hand movements with such focused attention that Jamie felt truly heard and acknowledged. The horses seemed to instinctively understand each child's unique needs and limitations. They never made sudden movements that might startle anxious children, never pressed too close to those who needed more space, and always responded with patience to those who took longer to express themselves. Thomas found himself thinking about his own daughter, who lived overseas with her mother. He realized he had never fully appreciated how much children needed this kind of unconditional acceptance and understanding. Watching Wellington interact with these special children was teaching Thomas as much about compassion as it was teaching the children about horses. The other guards had begun to take notice as well. Word was spreading quietly through the ranks about what was happening in the courtyard. Senior officers who had been busy with administrative duties began finding excuses to walk through the area, and many stopped to observe the unprecedented scene. As the scheduled tour time was drawing to a close, Mrs. Mitchell approached Thomas again. "Sergeant Major, I know we're supposed to move on to the next part of our visit, but the children have never been this engaged and happy. Is there any possibility we could stay a few more minutes?" Thomas looked at Wellington, who seemed as content as he had ever seen him, then at the faces of the children who were still marveling at their new equine friends. Making a decision that went against protocol but felt absolutely right, Thomas nodded. "I think Wellington and Chester would be disappointed if their new friends left too soon," he said with a smile that surprised even himself. The children cheered softly when they learned they could stay longer, and the horses seemed to understand that their time together had been extended. What had started as a routine ceremonial duty was becoming something that would change everyone involved in ways they were only beginning to understand. News of the extraordinary interaction between the guard horses and the children with special needs began to spread throughout Windsor Castle. Captain Elizabeth Hartwell, the commanding officer of the ceremonial guard unit, had received reports of the unusual situation and decided to investigate personally. As she approached the courtyard, Captain Hartwell expected to find a minor disruption that needed to be managed quickly and efficiently. What she discovered instead stopped her in her tracks. The scene before her was unlike anything she had witnessed in her 15 years of military service. Wellington stood with perfect posture but with an unmistakable gentleness in his bearing, while Emma continued her soft conversation with him. The horses' responses were so subtle yet so clearly intentional that even the most skeptical observer would have to acknowledge something special was happening. "He's listening to every word," Emma was saying to Mrs. Mitchell. "I can tell because his ears move when I talk, and his eyes get softer when I tell him nice things." Captain Hartwell watched as Emma reached into her small backpack and pulled out a drawing she had made during art class the week before. It was a colorful picture of a horse with a crown, surrounded by flowers and hearts. "I made this for a guard horse," Emma explained to Wellington, holding up the drawing so he could see it. "I didn't know which one I would meet, but I hoped he would like it." Wellington's reaction was remarkable. The great horse lowered his head further and seemed to study the drawing with genuine interest. His nostrils flared gently as if trying to catch the scent of the crayons Emma had used, and his ears swiveled forward in a display of focused attention. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest as he watched this interaction. In 3 years of partnership with Wellington, he had never seen the horse show such personal interest in anything a visitor had brought. The connection between this gentle child and his powerful partner was teaching him something profound about the capacity for understanding that existed beyond words. Meanwhile, Marcus had moved closer to Chester and was sharing his carefully researched horse facts with David, his support worker, while looking directly at the bay horse. "Did you know that horses can sleep both lying down and standing up?" Marcus said, his voice gaining confidence. "And they can remember human friends even after years of separation." Chester responded to Marcus's voice by turning his head slightly toward the boy, and for a moment, their eyes met directly. This was significant for Marcus, who rarely made eye contact with anyone. The horse's patient gaze seemed to provide exactly the right amount of gentle contact without overwhelming pressure. Captain Hartwell found herself moving closer to observe these interactions more carefully. As someone who had dedicated her life to military precision and protocol, she was surprised by how deeply moved she felt, watching her ceremonial horses provide what could only be described as emotional support. Lily had been wheeling her chair to different positions to get various views of the horses, and her communication device had been busy translating her observations. "The horses are better than therapy dogs," her electronic voice announced. "They are bigger so they can give bigger comfort, and they stand very still so people in wheelchairs can get close safely." This comment caught the attention of Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a developmental pediatrician who had volunteered to accompany the school trip. Dr. Walsh had been observing the children's reactions with professional interest, noting improvements in social engagement, reduced anxiety behaviors, and increased verbal communication across the group. "You're very observant, Lily," Dr. Walsh said, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "What else have you noticed about how the horses make you and your friends feel?" Lily's fingers moved quickly across her device. "They don't get impatient when we take time to talk. They don't look away when we look different. They just stay calm and let us be ourselves." Dr. Walsh felt a surge of excitement as she recognized the therapeutic potential of what she was witnessing. She had read research about equine-assisted therapy, but seeing these spontaneous interactions was providing insights that no clinical study could capture. A small crowd of other tourists had gathered at a respectful distance, many of them taking photos and videos. Among them was Jennifer Chen, a journalist who had been visiting the castle to research a travel article. She found herself abandoning her original story idea as she witnessed something far more newsworthy unfolding before her eyes. Jennifer began taking careful notes, capturing not just what was happening but the emotions it was generating in everyone present. The guards' faces showed a mixture of professional pride and personal amazement. The teachers and support workers displayed wonder and joy at seeing their students so engaged and confident. But it was the faces of the children that told the real story. Emma's expression showed pure happiness and connection. Marcus displayed a level of calm focus that his teachers rarely saw in classroom settings. Sam, who had been hiding behind David earlier, was now standing independently near Chester, his anxiety replaced by genuine curiosity. Rachel, the shy girl who rarely spoke above a whisper, had found her voice and was asking Mrs. Mitchell questions about horse care and training. "Do they like music?" she asked. "Could I sing to them?" Before Mrs. Mitchell could respond, Rachel began humming a soft melody she had learned in music class. Both Wellington and Chester turned their ears toward the sound, and their entire demeanor became even more relaxed and attentive. The melody was simple and sweet, and Rachel's confidence grew as she saw the horse's positive response. Soon she was singing softly, her voice gaining strength with each note. Other children began to hum along, creating an impromptu choir that seemed to cast a spell over the entire courtyard. Captain Hartwell found herself stepping back to take in the full scene. Her military training had taught her to assess situations quickly and objectively, but what she was witnessing defied easy categorization. This wasn't simply crowd control or tourist management. This was something that touched the very heart of what service meant. Thomas caught her eye and gave her a questioning look, clearly seeking guidance about how long this unprecedented situation should continue. Captain Hartwell considered the regulations, the schedule, and the potential complications of allowing this to continue. Then she looked at Emma, who was still showing Wellington her drawing, and at Marcus, who was more animated than his teachers had ever seen him, and at all the other children who were experiencing something truly special. Captain Hartwell made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of ending the visit and returning to normal protocol, she quietly radioed for other ceremonial horses to be brought to the courtyard. If these children could benefit so much from meeting 2 guard horses, she reasoned, perhaps they deserved the chance to meet a few more. Her decision would soon prove to be one that would change not only the lives of these particular children, but also the way the Royal Guard approached their role in serving the public. What had started as an unplanned interaction was about to become something much larger and more meaningful than anyone could have imagined. Within minutes of Captain Hartwell's radio call, 3 more magnificent guard horses were being led into the courtyard by their riders. Each horse seemed to sense the special nature of the gathering as they approached, their usual military precision softening into something more welcoming and gentle. Thunder, a powerful gray Shire horse, arrived first with Lance Corporal Sarah Murphy. Thunder had a reputation for being particularly intuitive, and as soon as he saw the children, his ears perked forward with interest. Behind him came Majesty, a stunning chestnut mare ridden by Trooper Benjamin Clark, and finally Storm, a gentle black gelding partnered with Corporal Lisa Reynolds. The children's excitement was palpable, but remained respectfully quiet. They had been taught about the importance of not startling the horses, and their natural empathy seemed to guide them toward appropriate behavior without constant reminders from their teachers. Dr. Walsh continued her observations, now taking detailed notes about what she was witnessing.
She had never seen such immediate and sustained engagement from this particular group of children.
Jamie, who typically struggled with attention and focus, had been watching the horses intently for over 30 minutes without any signs of restlessness or distraction. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Walsh said quietly, I think we're witnessing something that could have significant implications for therapeutic approaches. These children are displaying levels of social engagement and emotional regulation that we rarely see in clinical settings. Mrs. Mitchell nodded, still amazed by the transformation in her students. I've been teaching special needs children for 12 years, and I've never seen them this calm and confident in a new environment. It's as if the horses are providing exactly what each child needs. Emma had moved to meet Thunder, and the big gray horse seemed particularly drawn to her gentle energy. As she approached, Thunder lowered his massive head in the same welcoming gesture that Wellington had shown, and Emma's face lit up with wonder. Another friend, she exclaimed softly. He's even bigger than Wellington, but his eyes are just as kind. Thunder's response was to blow softly through his nostrils, a sound that made Emma giggle with delight. The interaction was so natural and joyful that several of the guards found themselves smiling despite their attempts to maintain professional composure. Marcus had discovered that he could move between horses and compare their different characteristics, something that appealed to his analytical mind. He began sharing his observations with anyone who would listen, his voice growing stronger with each comment. Thunder has a white star on his forehead, but Storm has a white sock on his left front leg, he noted to David. And Majesty's mane is lighter than her body color. Each horse is unique, just like people are unique. This observation struck the adults as particularly profound, coming from a child who often struggled with understanding social differences and similarities among people. The horses seemed to be providing Marcus with a framework for understanding diversity in a way that human interactions had not. Lily had positioned her wheelchair where she could observe all 5 horses, and her communication device was working overtime as she processed everything she was seeing. This is like a horse library, her electronic voice announced. Each horse has different stories to tell with their bodies and their faces. Jennifer Chen, the journalist, had filled several pages of her notebook and was considering how to capture this story in a way that would do justice to its emotional impact. She approached Dr. Walsh, recognizing that the medical professional might provide important context for what they were witnessing. Dr. Walsh, as someone with expertise in developmental pediatrics, how would you explain what we're seeing here? Jennifer asked. Dr. Walsh paused, choosing her words carefully. What we're observing appears to be a natural form of animal-assisted therapy, but it's happening spontaneously without any formal structure or training. The horses seem to be intuitively providing what each child needs. whether that's calming presence, gentle stimulation, or non-judgmental acceptance. She gestured toward the children, who were now spread throughout the courtyard, each engaged with different horses. Notice how each interaction is unique. Emma responds to direct, gentle contact. Marcus thrives on the intellectual stimulation of observing and comparing. Sam finds comfort in the horse's calm, steady presence. The horses are naturally adapting to each child's individual needs. Captain Hartwell had been watching these interactions with growing amazement and a developing sense that this experience needed to be documented and shared. She approached Thomas, who was still mounted on Wellington and overseeing the entire gathering with obvious pride in his partner's behavior. "Sergeant Major Bradley," she said, "I want you to know that what you and Wellington have facilitated here today is extraordinary. Have you ever considered the possibility of developing formal programs that could bring together our ceremonial horses with special needs groups?" Thomas looked down at his commanding officer, surprised by the suggestion. "Ma'am, I've always known Wellington was special, but I never imagined he could have this kind of impact on children. If there were a way to create more opportunities like this, I believe it could benefit both the horses and the visitors." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near Storm and his rider, Corporal Reynolds. Sam, who had been quietly observing from a distance, had suddenly approached the black gelding and was standing directly in front of him. Instead of the anxiety he usually displayed in crowded situations, Sam appeared completely at peace. Storm stood perfectly still, seeming to understand that this child needed absolute stability and predictability. The horse's breathing was slow and regular, creating a calming rhythm that Sam began to unconsciously match with his own breathing. David, Sam's support worker, watched in amazement as the boy's typical stimming behaviors, hand flapping and rocking, gradually ceased. Sam's posture straightened, and for the first time all day, he made direct eye contact with another living being as he looked into Storm's gentle brown eyes. "This is incredible," David whispered to Mrs. Mitchell. "Sam rarely makes eye contact with people, and he's never been this calm around large animals. Storm seems to understand exactly what Sam needs." The moment stretched on, child and horse simply being present with each other in a way that transcended the need for words or actions. It was a connection that spoke to something fundamental about the capacity for understanding between different species. Rachel, who had been singing softly to Majesty, had attracted the attention of several other children. Soon a small group had gathered around the chestnut mare, all of them humming and singing together. Majesty seemed to enjoy the music, swishing her tail gently in rhythm and occasionally nickering softly in what sounded almost like harmony. The impromptu concert created a magical atmosphere throughout the courtyard. Even the regular tourists had stopped their sightseeing to watch and listen, many of them visibly moved by the beauty of the scene. Captain Hartwell pulled out her phone and began taking photos, realizing that this moment needed to be preserved not just as a memory, but as evidence of something important that was happening. She had a feeling that this day would mark the beginning of something much larger than anyone present could yet imagine. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the cobblestones, it became clear that this was no longer just a school visit to a historic site. It had become a demonstration of the profound connections that could exist between humans and animals, particularly when both brought their authentic selves to the encounter. The children continued their individual interactions with the horses, each relationship developing its own unique character and rhythm. What had started as a chance meeting was evolving into something that would change everyone involved and potentially influence how institutions like the Royal Guard understood their role in serving the community. As word of the extraordinary gathering spread throughout Windsor Castle, more staff members began to appear in the courtyard. Colonel Robert Davidson, the senior commanding officer for the entire Royal Guard Ceremonial Division, had received multiple reports about the unusual situation and decided to investigate. Personally, Colonel Davidson was known for his strict adherence to protocol and his no-nonsense approach to military operations. As he approached the courtyard, he expected to find a situation that needed immediate correction and a return to normal procedures. Instead, he found himself witnessing something that challenged every assumption he had about the proper role of ceremonial units. The scene before him was unlike anything in his 30-year military career. 5 of his finest guard horses stood in perfect formation, yet their demeanor was entirely different from their usual ceremonial bearing. They displayed a gentleness and attentiveness that he had never seen during official functions, and the children they were interacting with showed a level of respect and wonder that surpassed that of many adult dignitaries. Emma had spent considerable time with both Wellington and Thunder, and she was now attempting to show her drawing to each horse individually. Her patience and gentle approach impressed everyone watching, including Colonel Davidson, who found himself marveling at the child's natural understanding of how to interact respectfully with such large, powerful animals. "Look," Emma was saying to Thunder, holding up her colorful drawing, "I drew this horse with a crown because I know you're all very important. You protect the queen and make ceremonies beautiful." Thunder's response was to lower his great head and appear to study the drawing with serious attention. His ears remained forward and his breathing stayed calm and regular, providing exactly the kind of steady presence that made Emma feel valued and heard. Dr. Walsh had been documenting the therapeutic benefits she was observing, and she approached Colonel Davidson with a proposition that surprised him. "Colonel, I'm a developmental pediatrician, and what I'm witnessing here has tremendous potential for therapeutic applications. These children are displaying improvements in social engagement, emotional regulation, and communication that we rarely see in traditional clinical settings." Colonel Davidson listened carefully as Dr. Walsh explained her observations. "The horses seem to naturally provide what each child needs, whether that's calming presence, gentle stimulation, or non-judgmental acceptance. This appears to be a form of animal-assisted therapy that's happening organically." Meanwhile, Marcus had become fascinated with the different personalities and characteristics of each horse. He was moving systematically from one to another, taking notes in his small notebook and sharing his observations with anyone who would listen. "Storm is the quietest," he told his support worker, David. "He thinks carefully before he moves, just like I do when I'm learning new things. But Thunder is more curious. He wants to investigate everything, and Majesty likes music the best." These observations showed a level of social and emotional intelligence that Marcus rarely displayed in human interactions. The horses seemed to be providing him with a framework for understanding different personalities and behavioral styles in a way that was both comfortable and engaging. Jennifer Chen had been conducting informal interviews with the teachers, support workers, and guards, gathering quotes and impressions for what she now realized was a much more significant story than she had initially imagined. The journalist in her recognized that this was more than just a heartwarming, human interest piece, and it was a story about breakthrough, therapeutic approaches, and the untapped potential for institutions to serve their communities in new ways. Captain Hartwell approached Colonel Davidson with a proposal that she had been considering for the past hour. "Sir, I believe we should consider developing a formal program that would allow special needs groups regular access to our ceremonial horses. What we're seeing today suggests that this could be a valuable service we could provide to the community." Colonel Davidson was intrigued but cautious. "Captain, while I'm impressed by what I'm witnessing, we need to consider the practical implications. These horses have demanding ceremonial schedules, and we have security protocols that must be maintained." Their discussion was interrupted by a development that captured everyone's attention. Lily had been working with her communication device to compose a longer message, and when she activated it, her electronic voice filled the courtyard with words that brought tears to many eyes. "Thank you, beautiful horses, for showing us that being different is okay. You are all different colors and sizes, but you work together to do important jobs. You teach us that we can be different and still be valuable and loved. We will remember this day forever." The horses seemed to respond to her words with increased attention and gentleness. Wellington took a step closer to Lily's wheelchair, while Thunder lowered his head in what appeared to be a bow of acknowledgement. The other horses shifted their positions slightly, creating a protective circle around the group of children. This spontaneous response from the horses convinced even the most skeptical observers that something genuinely special was taking place. These were not random behaviors or coincidental movements. The horses were clearly responding to the emotional content of the interactions in ways that demonstrated remarkable sensitivity and intelligence. Sam, who had spent most of his time in quiet communion with Storm, suddenly did something that amazed everyone present. He reached out and gently placed his hand on Storm's neck, making physical contact with another living being in a way that his teachers had never seen him do before. Storm stood absolutely motionless, seeming to understand the significance of this gesture for Sam. The horse's breathing remained steady and calming, providing the perfect level of contact without any pressure or demands for further interaction. David, Sam's support worker, felt tears welling up in his eyes as he watched this breakthrough moment. Sam has been working with therapists for years to develop comfort with physical contact. What Storm just facilitated in a few minutes of natural interaction is something we've been trying to achieve in clinical settings for months. The medical and educational professionals present began to discuss the implications of what they were witnessing. Dr. Walsh suggested that this natural form of animal-assisted therapy could potentially be more effective than many traditional approaches because it removed the clinical environment that sometimes created anxiety for children with special needs. Mrs. Mitchell found herself thinking about each of her students and how this experience might influence their development and self-confidence. I've watched these children struggle with social situations and new environments for years. Today they've shown confidence, curiosity, and social engagement that I've rarely seen from them. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that this was not just a memorable field trip, but a potentially life-changing experience for everyone involved. The children had discovered new aspects of themselves. The guards had learned about the therapeutic potential of their partners, and the horses had demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond their ceremonial roles. Colonel Davidson found himself reconsidering his initial concerns about protocol and procedure. What he was witnessing represented the very best of what military service could offer, not just ceremony and tradition, but genuine service to those who needed it most. The foundation was being laid for something that would extend far beyond this single day, something that would change how the Royal Guard understood their mission and their potential to serve the community in ways they had never previously imagined. As the magical afternoon began to draw to a close, Colonel Davidson made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for the Royal Guard and the community they served. Standing in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the evidence of what these remarkable horses could accomplish, he announced his intention to create a formal program that would bring special needs children together with the ceremonial horses on a regular basis. What we've witnessed here today, Colonel Davidson said to the assembled group, represents the very best of what service means. These horses and their riders have demonstrated that our role extends beyond ceremony and tradition. We have an opportunity to serve our community in a way that truly makes a difference in people's lives. The children from Sunshine School had been reluctant to leave their new equine friends, but they understood that their special time was coming to an end. However, instead of the usual sadness that accompanied the end of field trips, there was an atmosphere of hope and excitement as they learned about the Colonel's plans for future visits. Emma approached Wellington one final time, clutching her horse drawing and a new picture she had quickly sketched during the afternoon. The second drawing showed herself standing next to Wellington, both of them smiling, with the words "best friends" written in her careful handwriting across the top. "Wellington," she said softly, "I drew us together so you won't forget me. Will you remember that I came to visit you today?" Wellington's response was extraordinary. The great horse lowered his head until it was level with Emma's, and for a moment, they simply looked into each other's eyes. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost human in its tenderness, Wellington gently nudged Emma's shoulder with his muzzle, as if to say that he would indeed remember their special friendship. Thomas felt a lump in his throat as he watched this farewell. In all his years of military service, he had never experienced anything as moving as the connection between his partner and this gentle child. He made a mental note to request assignment to the new program that Colonel Davidson had proposed, knowing that Wellington would want to continue this important work. Marcus had filled his notebook with observations about each horse, and he was already planning to research more about equine behavior and therapy when he returned to school. His excitement about learning was infectious, and his teachers recognized that this experience had opened new avenues for his education and development. "I want to learn everything about horses," Marcus told Dr. Walsh. "Not just facts, but how they think and feel and communicate. Today I learned that intelligence comes in many different forms, and horses are much smarter than most people realize." Dr. Walsh smiled, recognizing that Marcus had gained insights that went far beyond horse behavior. "You're absolutely right, Marcus. And what's wonderful is that you've also learned something important about yourself. That you have a special gift for understanding and connecting with Animals. Lily had been using her communication device to compose a final message for the horses, and when she activated it, her words carried the hopes and dreams of all the children who had been part of this extraordinary day. "Dear horse friends," her electronic voice announced, "today you taught us that kindness doesn't need words. You showed us that being gentle is a kind of strength. You helped us feel brave and special. We promise to remember what you taught us and to be kind to other people the way you were kind to us. Thank you for the best day ever." The horses seemed to understand that this was a farewell message. Each of them, Wellington, Chester, Thunder, Storm, and Majesty, turned their attention toward Lily's wheelchair, their ears forward and their expressions gentle and attentive. It was as if they were acknowledging not just her words, but the courage and wisdom that this remarkable group of children had shown throughout the day. Jennifer Chen had pages of notes and dozens of photos, but she realized that the real story was not just what had happened, but what it represented for the future. This was a story about breaking down barriers, about discovering untapped potential, and about the power of genuine connection to transform lives. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jennifer asked, "how do you think this experience will affect your students going forward?" Mrs. Mitchell looked around at her students, all of whom were glowing with confidence and joy. "I think today has shown them that they are capable of forming meaningful relationships with beings who are different from themselves. They've learned that their gentle, patient approach to the world is actually a tremendous strength. Most importantly, they've experienced unconditional acceptance in a way that will stay with them forever." As the children boarded their yellow school bus for the journey home, each of them carried something precious from their encounter with the guard horses. Emma clutched both her drawings and had already begun planning what she would draw for her next visit. Marcus had his notebook full of observations and a new passion for learning about animal behavior. Sam had discovered that physical affection could be comforting rather than overwhelming. Rachel had found her voice and her confidence in singing. But perhaps the most significant changes were occurring among the adults who had witnessed these interactions. Captain Hartwell had already begun drafting proposals for the new program, working with Dr. Walsh to develop protocols that would maximize therapeutic benefits while maintaining the dignity and well-being of both the horses and the children. Thomas and the other guards found themselves viewing their roles in an entirely new light. They had always known that their horses were special, but today had revealed just how much their partners were capable of giving to others. The pride they felt in their ceremonial duties was now enhanced by the knowledge that their service could extend to some of society's most vulnerable and deserving members. Colonel Davidson had already scheduled meetings with disability services organizations, special education specialists, and animal therapy experts to develop a comprehensive program that could serve as a model for other military units around the world. As the sun began to set over Windsor Castle, casting long golden rays across the cobblestone courtyard, the 5 guard horses stood together in a loose circle, as if they too were reflecting on the day's events. They had discovered something about themselves that went beyond their training and their ceremonial roles. They had found their capacity to heal, to comfort, and to connect with human hearts in the most profound ways. Wellington turned his great head toward the spot where Emma had stood with her drawings, and for a moment it seemed as though he was already anticipating her return. The other horses, too, appeared to be processing the day's experiences, their usual military bearing softened by the memory of gentle hands and grateful hearts. The story of this remarkable day would soon spread far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. Jennifer Chen's article would be picked up by international media. Dr. Walsh's clinical observations would contribute to research on animal-assisted therapy, and the Royal Guard's new program would become a model for innovative community service. But perhaps most importantly, 12 children with special needs had learned that they were worthy of love, attention, and respect from some of the most magnificent creatures in the world. They had experienced a day when their differences were not obstacles to overcome, but gifts to be celebrated. And 5 exceptional horses had shown the world that true nobility lies not just in pomp and ceremony, but in the gentle act of opening one's heart to those who need it most. Their legacy would live on in every child whose life was touched by their extraordinary capacity for love and understanding. The magic of that day would ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of positive change that would reach far beyond what anyone present could have imagined. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest acts of kindness and connection.